What if the man you were about to marry tomorrow was sleeping with your assistant tonight? My name is Elena Brooks. I was the CFO, the bride-to-be, the woman with a future, until one unlocked door shattered everything. But this isn't a heartbreak story. This is how I made revenge beautiful.
Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
My name is Elena Brooks. I'm 34 years old. And what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. Seattle in late spring has this dishonest kind of optimism. The skies act like they're done mourning, but they never really are. That afternoon, a pale sun poured through my kitchen windows, like it had somewhere better to be. The light bounced off polished copper pans and slanted across the marble counters. The air smelled like rosemary, garlic, and simmering veal shank, osso buco, Graham's favorite. I hadn't cooked it in months. I usually didn't have time. But this wasn't just any night. It was the night before our wedding. The last quiet breath before the plunge. I stirred the sauce gently, watching the bone marrow melt into something richer, deeper. He used to say it reminded him of Florence, of us ducking under awnings in the rain, our fingers sticky with gelato, our laughter echoing through narrow stone alleys. We were younger then, or maybe just lighter. That trip was when I first thought I could marry this man. And now, here we were. I had just turned 34, CFO of one of the most aggressive tech firms in Seattle, a condo overlooking Lake Washington, a closet curated like a runway, a man everyone admired, a wedding planned down to the minute. On paper, it was airtight. People envied me, and most days, I believed I had earned it, not inherited it, not stumbled into it. Earned. I'd built this life from the ground up, brick by ruthless brick. I played the long game. I made the right alliances. I said no when I wanted to say yes. To things that didn't serve the vision. I never cried in boardrooms. I never drank more than one. I ran marathons in the dark while the city slept. I loved smart and safe and hard. Graham had fit that vision perfectly. Charismatic, ambitious, emotionally literate, in a way that didn't seem performative. Our connection felt adult, measured, grounded. After years of boys who needed rescuing or mentoring or fixing, he felt like a man I could lean on without toppling. That should have been enough. I remember taking a sip of wine and glancing down at the engagement ring. A 2.3-carat oval diamond in a halo setting, elegant, tasteful, expensive. It caught the light just so. I tilted my hand, watching it glitter. Then something in my chest stirred. A strange pause. Not dread, not joy. Doubt. Not the kind that shouts. The kind that whispers, "Is anything really this perfect?" I shook it off like a coat I didn't remember putting on. Probably wedding nerves, or fatigue. I'd barely slept. The last 2 weeks had been a carousel of cake tastings, venue walkthroughs, and seating charts. My body was tired, my mind overstimulated. Still, something in me itched, restless. Maybe that's why I turned off the stove and moved without thinking. I plated the dessert, grabbed the wine, slipped on my coat, and took the spare key Graham had given me 6 months ago. I left the condo with a smile on my lips and a ridiculous idea in my head. Surprise him. One last spontaneous moment, before vows and veils and vows again. The sky was a pale bruise above downtown Seattle. I remember the wind flipping my coat as I stepped into the elevator of his high-rise. The ride to the 42nd floor felt longer than usual. I checked my reflection in the mirrored panel, no lipstick on my teeth, hair mostly in place, eyes tired but still holding a spark. I imagined how he'd look when he opened the door, barefoot, t-shirt slightly wrinkled, that crooked smile that always disarmed me. He'd pull me in, kiss my forehead, maybe mutter something like, "You couldn't wait till tomorrow," and I'd laugh. That's not how it happened. The hallway was dim. His door looked the same. Modern, steel gray, impersonal, but somehow colder. I slipped the key in carefully, slowly, the way you do when you're trying not to ruin a good surprise. The door opened noiselessly. Inside, the apartment was dark, lit only by the silver glow of the city filtering through the vast windows. The place smelled faintly of sandalwood and wine. For a second, I thought he wasn't home. I took a few tentative steps in, My heels echoed like accusations on the hardwood. I remember smiling at myself, thinking I should have texted first. And then I heard it. Laughter. High. Breathless. Familiar in a way that made my stomach turn before my brain caught up. Mia, my assistant. No, my friend. The woman who once cried in my office about her divorce. The woman I'd vouched for, mentored, promoted. Her laugh was followed by a low, amused murmur. Graham. The air around me thickened. I moved forward like my feet weren't mine, like I was a ghost haunting my own life. The bedroom door was ajar. Inside, moonlight painted their bodies in blue. She was on top of him, her hair a cascade of chaos. He kissed her neck with a kind of hunger I hadn't seen in weeks. Her hands roamed his chest like it was hers, and he let her. And why wouldn't he? They looked practiced. I didn't scream, I didn't drop the wine. I placed it quietly on the credenza. My hand found the key still clenched in my palm. It had left angry little half-moons in my skin. Something in me went still. Not numb, not broken. Cold. Like metal being forged. I pulled out my phone. Hands trembling, breath shallow. 1 photo. 2, then I hit record. My thumb hovered as they laughed about something that made Mia snort and slap his chest playfully. I caught it all. This isn't heartbreak, I heard myself think. This is documentation. I backed away like I'd just stepped into a crime scene. I don't remember the elevator ride, or the drive home. I must have driven because I woke up in my own house, my dress still on, mascara smeared. The osso buco still on the stove, cold and congealed. But what I do remember is the silence. The kind that doesn't comfort you. The kind that warns. Tomorrow was supposed to be the beginning of everything. Instead, it became the end of the version of me who still believed in perfect. The next morning, I didn't wake up, I surfaced. I was still in yesterday's dress. The osso buco had congealed on the stove, untouched. The smell was faint now, sour almost, as if even the food knew it had been made under false pretenses. I sat up slowly, like I had to renegotiate gravity. My head was pounding. Not from alcohol, but from the ache of clarity. I hadn't cried. Not once. There was no sobbing into pillowcases. No mascara rivers down my cheeks. I think my body understood something I hadn't yet put into words. Grief required loss. What I had witnessed last night wasn't the loss of love. It was the revelation of truth. And truth, cruel as it is, does not warrant mourning. It demands action. I stood, walked barefoot to the sink, poured the untouched wine down the drain. It gurgled like a throat closing. Then I opened my laptop. I didn't look at wedding photos. I didn't open our shared Pinterest board labeled forever. I opened a folder named Prenup. Click. There it was, the document Graham had insisted we draft. Just in case. I remembered how charmingly he'd framed it. We're both professionals, Lena. It's just smart planning. And I had smiled and agreed. Because back then, I thought smart was the same thing as safe. Now, all I saw was a paper trail of a man building an exit ramp before the journey began. I emailed it to Caroline. Within minutes, she replied with one line. We need to talk. Today. Caroline and I had been friends since undergrad. She was now a top family lawyer in Seattle. Razor sharp, ethically solid, and utterly loyal. We met at our usual cafe in Kirkland. I wore oversized sunglasses and a beige trench. I didn't speak until the coffee was in front of me. Then I simply said, he cheated. With Mia. Caroline didn't gasp. She didn't rush to pity. That's why I trusted her. She nodded once and opened her laptop. Do you want to cancel the wedding? I stirred my coffee. Eventually, but not yet. Her brows lifted. I want answers first, I said. This doesn't feel like sex. This feels like strategy. That's when her voice lowered. You think this is financial? I think it's bigger than just betrayal, I replied. Mia's been asking for access to client pitch files. Graham's company was bidding on a sustainable architecture contract worth $140 million, the same one I've been advising our board on. And he always found a way to ask about it at dinner. Caroline didn't speak for a moment. Then she closed her laptop slowly. I'm going to refer you to someone, she said. His name is Ethan Reyes. Cybersecurity and internal investigations. Quiet, efficient, and not cheap. I don't care about cheap. I didn't think you did. That night, back at my condo, I stood in front of the full-length mirror. My wedding dress hung behind me like a ghost. The silk shimmered in the low light, delicate and pure, but I didn't look at it. I looked at myself. And I didn't see a victim. I saw a storm, waiting for orders. The knock at the door came at exactly 7:14 p.m. Ethan Reyes was younger than I expected. Early 30s, ex-military posture, laptop already under one arm, calm eyes like he'd seen this all before. "I work quietly," he said as he sat on the edge of my couch. "If there's a digital trail, I'll find it. Phones, shared files, cloud syncs. You said they used your penthouse Wi-Fi. That helps." I handed him Graham's device access records and a separate file on Mia's work laptop. "Start there," I said. "I want proof, and I want it clean." He gave a tight nod and started typing. While he worked, I walked to the window, staring out at the Seattle skyline. Lights blinked across the sound. Somewhere below, people were laughing, drinking, kissing. Believing in tomorrows, I envied them. By midnight, Ethan looked up from his screen, eyes harder than before. "I have it," he said. I turned slowly. He pushed his laptop toward me. The screen displayed an email thread. Attached were data transfer logs, timestamps, and project documents, downloaded from my cloud, sent to a Gmail registered under a dummy name. That account had forwarded files directly to an architecture firm that had just placed a bid on the $140 million contract, the same firm Graham used to work for. I clicked through the attachments. I knew every page. They were mine, my numbers, my insights, my strategy. Every competitive edge I had fought for now weaponized against me. Mia uploaded them using her company credentials, Ethan added. Graham's name is on none of it. He's clean, officially. But Mia doesn't know enough to pull this off on her own. Of course she didn't. She didn't even understand basic profit forecasting. He was using her access. She was the glove, he was the hand, and I was the pawn. I sat back, slow and cold. A familiar tension settled in my chest, tight but clear. No panic, just precision. "This isn't an affair," I said quietly. "It's corporate espionage." Ethan nodded. I stood and walked toward the mirror again, the dress still hanging behind me. But this time I smiled. It wasn't bitter, it was strategic. "Do you still want to cancel the wedding?" Ethan asked from the couch. "No," I said. "I want to weaponize it." And in that moment, I saw the plan form clearly in my mind. The altar, the crowd, the speech. If they wanted a stage, I'd give them one. I didn't cry that night. Not when Ethan showed me the emails. Not when he confirmed that Graham had used Mia like a Trojan horse to gut my company's proposal from the inside. Not even when I realized just how close I had come to signing over my name, my life, and my future to a man who had never loved me, only calculated me. Instead, I went home, took off my coat, and stood alone in the silence of my Bellevue house. The walls felt too white, too still. I walked past the living room, past the wine I hadn't touched, and into the master bedroom. There it was, my wedding gown, still hanging from the carved oak screen, ethereal in layers of ivory silk and lace. It looked almost too fragile to wear. A relic of someone else's fantasy. I stepped closer, my fingers brushed the fabric, and I expected something, tears maybe, or rage, something to snap, but nothing did. Just quiet, deep, unsettling quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it. Not with longing, not even with hate, but with a bone-deep kind of disappointment, not in him, not in Mia, in me. I thought I was smarter than this. I thought I could see people for who they really were. I built a career on reading rooms, reading risks, reading silence. I wasn't the woman who got played. Except, apparently, I was. How did I miss it? The little moments came flooding back like sharp edits in a bad film. The times Graham asked about investor meetings under the guise of curiosity. The way Mia had requested just a peek at pitch decks to better support me. The tension in Graham's jaw when I refused to share confidential details. It wasn't love, it was leverage. I looked at the dress again. "Who were you planning to be in that, Elena?" I whispered to myself. Someone who got chosen? Or someone who forgot how to choose? The air in the room felt like it was shrinking. I got up and poured myself a glass of water just to anchor my hands. They weren't shaking, not anymore. They were steady, cold, like steel being tempered. My phone buzzed. It was Carolyn. Carolyn. Want to pull the plug? We can do it tonight. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered. I could end it here. Send out the email blast. Call off the guests. Pull the dress off the rack and burn it in the backyard. But something in me hesitated. Not out of sentiment, out of purpose. Me. Not yet. I want the truth. And justice. This can't just be about sex. He's too ambitious. She replied instantly. Caroline. Understood. What's your next move? I typed the words carefully. Me. I'm going to let the wedding happen, but not the way they think. I tossed the phone onto the bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I knew I wouldn't sleep. Not tonight. Probably not for days. Instead, I reached for my laptop. I opened a blank document and began to type. First, the timeline, then the digital evidence Ethan had collected. Next, a curated folder of photos, video snippets, financial analysis, IP transfer trails. Finally, a letter, not angry, not emotional, but surgical. I titled the file, Truth. When I was done, I encrypted the folder, uploaded it to a cloud drive, and scheduled it to send at exactly 12:45 p.m. during the vows. A mass email. Guests, investors, board members, press. If they wanted to humiliate me, fine, but I'd take them down with a standing ovation. I closed the laptop, got up, and walked to the mirror. My reflection looked back at me with something unfamiliar. Not sadness, not even rage. Conviction. I brushed my hair behind one ear and said softly, "He thinks I'm going to walk down that aisle tomorrow." I let the words settle in the room. Good. The next morning, the house was filled with the quiet hum of preparations. Florists dropped off white peonies. The cake arrived in 3 tiers of flawless fondant. My mother's voice trailed from the guest room, anxious, excited, oblivious. I let them all orbit around me like moons around a dying star. My father knocked gently on my door just before dinner. "Sweetheart, everyone's waiting downstairs." I adjusted my silk blouse, checked my face in the mirror. No cracks, no tells. Just the calm of someone who had already buried the version of herself that used to feel anything. "I'll be right down," I said. Dinner was held at my parents' estate in Mercer Island. Twinkle lights, long tables, wine that cost more than most people's rent. And there he was, Graham, smiling, laughing, performing. Mia trailed behind him, poised, subtle, her role perfected. No one questioned why my executive assistant was at the family dinner. She played the part well, always so helpful, always so loyal. To everyone but me. I took my seat across from them. Graham leaned over to take my hand. His palm was warm, confident. But the moment our skin touched, I felt it. A flicker of revulsion. Not anger, just awareness. The kind that whispers, "You know who he is now." I smiled. We toasted. We talked about honeymoon destinations. I asked him what he'd do if the sky fell tomorrow. He said, "Build us a new one." People laughed. I laughed too. It was almost easy, but then came the moment. I knocked over a glass of wine, intentionally, though no one noticed. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I said, grabbing his phone from the table to save it from the spill. I wiped it clean with a napkin, then slid it into my clutch. Later, I'd slip it back. By midnight, Ethan had already cloned the phone. I had full access. Texts, photos, GPS logs, voice memos. One stood out. A recording from 2 nights ago. Graham and Mia. Mia. "You think she suspects anything?" Graham, laughing. "Elena? She's brilliant in business, blind in love. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her. In 6 months, the prenup won't matter. And then..." Mia. "We're gone?" Graham, with half. Her portfolio. And the rest, well, she can keep her career. I'll keep the money. The tape ended with a kiss. I closed the file. I didn't feel betrayed anymore. I felt clean. The kind of clean that only comes from truth. Ugly, raw, undeniable truth. That night, before I slept, I opened the email draft one more time. Checked the attachments. Rewatched the video I took from the penthouse. paused on the moment his hand moved down her back, paused on the way she smiled like she had already won. I smiled too, but mine was different. Mine had purpose. People like to think betrayal comes with fireworks, screaming, tears, shattered plates, some sort of cinematic meltdown. But for me, it came through a quiet file transfer, a Gmail address, a forwarded document, a few lines of metadata Ethan unearthed like surgical shrapnel from the cloud. That's all it took, proof that Graham and Mia, my fiancé and my assistant, had siphoned data worth over 140 million and passed it to a direct competitor of my firm. With Mia's access, with Graham's coaching, with my trust as the foundation they stood on while pulling the trigger. It wasn't about infidelity, it was about theft. I remember staring at the email thread Ethan had pulled up on his screen. Each forwarded file had my initials in the document names, my formatting, my voice in the writing, internal forecasts, privileged deal terms. And there, casually forwarded by Mia like it was a restaurant menu, were months of my work. Sent from her company account to a dummy Gmail, and from that dummy account, straight to Studio Parnell, the very firm Graham had amicably left a year ago to start his own vision. They didn't just sleep together, they conspired. "What do you want to do with this?" Ethan asked, his voice flat, professionally detached. "I want it documented. Every byte, every date, every IP transfer log." He nodded. "I'll prep the chain of custody and verify timestamps. You'll need this airtight." "Airtight," I echoed. "Yes." Because now, it wasn't just about my pride. It was about my reputation, my legacy, my future. And that was war. I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time that night, replaying everything backwards. Not the kisses, not the lies. The strategy. I saw it all differently now. Graham had never pushed me on financials. He didn't need to. He let Mia take that lane. She was the one who kept asking me for context, for just a glimpse. She'd sit in on meetings I never invited her to and call it initiative. And I let her because I thought she was loyal, because I believed in mentorship, because I believed in Graham, and he used that belief like a crowbar. That was the part that sat in my chest like lead. I wasn't taken in by charm. I was taken in by design. They had played me like a long game. I walked over to the bar cart and poured myself 2 fingers of Lafroig, something sharp enough to match the taste in my mouth. The first sip burned, the second settled. I picked up my phone. Me, Caroline. I have full evidence of IP theft, financial espionage. We're proceeding. The reply came seconds later. "Caroline? Good. I'll prep breach of trust filings as a backup. You still want the public reveal?" Me. "Yes. But it has to be surgical. The timing has to hurt." At 2 a.m., I called Ethan back in. We built the folder together, labeled it Wedding Exy like some twisted joke. Inside, screenshots, email trails, voice memos, financials, and the recording from Graham's cloned phone where he laughed about getting out rich. I scheduled the email blast for 12:45 p.m. the next day. During the ceremony, right at the vows, every guest, every stakeholder, every board member, investor, media contact, all of them would get the truth. But the truth wasn't enough. It had to come after the spectacle, not before. I needed Graham to stand up there, needed him to say, "I do," needed Mia watching from the crowd, smug in her seat, so that when I lit the match, they were already soaking in gasoline. The next morning, I slipped into routine like it was armor. My makeup team arrived at dawn. The stylist buzzed around with curlers and brushes and contour palettes. Photographers moved through the room like shadows, capturing the final moments before I became a bride. I played the part, smiled at the mirror, sipped mimosa, tilted my chin just so for the lens. No one noticed my stillness. Or maybe they mistook it for nerves, the kind every bride has. They didn't know I wasn't worried. I was waiting. Caroline arrived in a navy blue pantsuit like a war general. She pulled me aside just before the car left for the vineyard. "You're really doing this," she said. "I am. This is the last chance to stop. You can walk away quietly. We can dissolve everything privately. Just a clean break." I looked at myself in the mirror, lipstick flawless, eyes sharp. But I didn't see a bride. I saw a woman returning to herself. "I'm not stopping," I said. I'm reclaiming my story. Caroline didn't argue. She just handed me a flash drive. Manual backup in case the automation fails. I tucked it into the clutch I'd carry down the aisle. Let them come. The drive to Woodinville Vineyard was surreal. It was beautiful, almost painfully so. Rows of sun-kissed grapevines, white petals lining the aisle, a string quartet playing something too soft to remember. Guests were seated. Phones were off. Smiles were everywhere, except mine. Graham was already there, laughing with his groomsmen. His suit was custom, tailored to perfection. His confidence, effortless. He waved when he saw me. I waved back. Mia was nearby, blending in as the perfect assistant. Not close enough to raise eyebrows, not far enough to seem irrelevant. Good. Let them feel safe. Let them believe they've won. I stayed in the bridal suite until 5 minutes before the ceremony. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. My mind was a vault. Ethan texted at 12:41 p.m. Ethan. Everything loaded. Email on schedule. Server pings confirmed. You're live. I turned off my phone, took one last look in the mirror, and walked out to marry a man I was about to destroy. The night before a wedding is supposed to be filled with butterflies. Mine were forged from steel and silence. My mother always said the rehearsal dinner was the last breath before the plunge. But I had already hit the bottom of the ocean, lungs full of saltwater lies, and now I was swimming back up with a knife between my teeth. The venue was my parents' estate on Mercer Island, the kind of place you only see in magazines. A colonial white mansion, trimmed hedges, string lights draped like jewelry across the lawn, tables set with gold-rimmed china and cream linens. Waiters in crisp black moved between guests with flutes of Veuve Clicquot. It looked like a love story. It smelled like legacy. It felt like theater. I arrived just after 6 p.m. in a pale blue silk dress, hair swept into a classic chignon. People turned. Phones snapped. I smiled just right, demure, bridal, glowing. No one could see the dagger behind my ribs. Every movement I made had been rehearsed. I knew when to glance at Graham, when to brush his shoulder, when to lean into his laugh like it still warmed me. I knew how to make my voice light when I said his name. I'd studied myself in the mirror like a woman learning her own role from scratch. Graham looked stunning, as always. Tailored navy suit, cufflinks gleaming, a face that knew how to perform sincerity. When he saw me, his eyes lit up like he'd been gifted something rare and breathtaking. "You're radiant," he whispered as he kissed my cheek. I let my hand trail across his lapel. "So are you." I meant it the way poison means death. Beautiful, certain, irreversible. He held my hand a moment longer than necessary. My ring pressed into the inside of his palm. It didn't burn him, it burned me. Dinner began with a toast from my father, standing proudly at the head of the table. We always hoped our daughter would marry a man who matched her brilliance. Elena is fierce, thoughtful, and uncompromising. And Graham, he paused for effect. "You're still here. That must mean something." Laughter. I smiled tightly. The food was exquisite. Burrata with roasted figs, wild mushroom risotto, duck breast glazed in burnt orange and thyme. Dessert would be lemon olive oil cake with mascarpone cream, the kind of menu that says, "We spare no expense because our love is priceless." But what I noticed most was the sound, not the music or the clinking glasses, but Mia's laugh. It rang out like a blade being unsheathed. She sat 2 chairs down from Graham, close but not too close, in a sleek black dress that danced the line between elegant and bold. Her smile was perfect, her timing better. She touched Graham's arm when no one looked. She refilled his wine with a flourish. She made herself indispensable, like she always had. I took a sip of my wine. Dry, deep, expensive. "To us," I said, lifting my glass. "To forever," Graham returned, eyes warm. The glasses clinked. I smiled, and for a second, I almost believed I could live in that illusion. That we could all keep pretending, but then the mask started to crack. Between courses, Caroline approached from behind me and rested a hand lightly on my shoulder. She leaned in. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Of course," I said. "Why wouldn't I be?" She smiled. "Because your assistant's cleavage is practically attending the wedding on your behalf." I almost laughed. "You have the flash drive," I whispered, eyes forward. Carolyn slid a tiny device across the table beneath her linen napkin. Redundant backup, just in case. Thank you. You look terrifying, she added. Good. When dessert came, so did my moment. I leaned across the table toward Graham, reaching for my glass. Then, crash. The wine glass tipped, Bordeaux splashing across the tablecloth. Some landed directly on Graham's phone. Oh no, I gasped. Let me grab it before it gets soaked. I reached faster than he did. Wrapped it in my napkin like it was fragile. I'll run it to the powder room, dry it out, I said, with practiced urgency. He waved me off, utterly charmed. You're a lifesaver. Again. I walked calmly into the bathroom, locked the door, and pulled out the clone key Ethan had given me. 30 seconds. That's all it took. Plug in, access full memory, encrypt, mirror to flash. His phone was a treasure trove. Messages, emails, voice notes. I didn't look yet. I just transferred. Then gently wiped the case with a towel and walked back out like I had just performed CPR on a phone. Crisis averted, I said sweetly, returning it to him. Graham kissed my temple. You always take care of me. Oh, honey, you have no idea. After dinner, guests wandered beneath the trees, sipping brandy, humming along to someone playing La Vie en Rose on the grand piano inside. I stepped onto the back patio just as Mia exited through the French doors, phone pressed to her ear. She didn't see me. Her voice floated out, hushed and smug. No, he doesn't suspect a thing. She's playing the role like she was born for it. A pause. Of course I'm being careful. Tomorrow it all wraps up. We'll walk away clean. She laughed. A small, self-satisfied sound. Then, honestly, I almost feel bad. But she's too career-obsessed to see it coming. I backed away before she could see me. It wasn't fury I felt. It was stillness. The kind of stillness that comes before lightning hits. Back in my room, I plugged in the clone drive. The files populated instantly, folder after folder of data. But it was the voice memo that drew me in. I clicked play. Graham's voice came through, low and rich. She's smart, but she wants the dream more than the details. That's her flaw. Mia, you're awful, Graham. She'll sign. She always does what's reasonable. And once the merger goes through, we split amicably. I get the equity, you get the title, and she gets to keep her name. They laughed. I didn't. I moved the memo into the blast folder, updated the email subject line, attached the last batch of evidence, and double-checked the automation set for 12:45 p.m. Then I stood at the mirror, not to cry, not to rehearse, but to look one last time at the woman they thought they had fooled. She stared back, flawless, spine straight, mouth firm. I slipped off the engagement ring, held it in my hand, then slid it back on. Not yet. Let them believe the performance. Let them believe in forever. Tomorrow the curtains fall, and the truth takes the stage. The morning of my wedding, I woke up before the sun. Not because I was nervous, because I was ready. There's a silence that comes just before a storm, not the frightened kind, the focused kind. And that morning, as the first light spilled across my bedroom floor, I felt it settle in my chest like a soldier clicking the final piece of her armor into place. I sat up slowly, letting the blankets fall. My gown hung across the room like a promise I had no intention of keeping. Downstairs, the house stirred with life. I could hear my mother instructing the florist, the clatter of silver trays, laughter from the bridal team, hair, makeup, champagne. The world thought I was about to begin the happiest day of my life. Only I knew it was the beginning of something far more precise. I stood, walked barefoot across the hardwood, and turned on my laptop. The folder labeled Truth glowed on the desktop like a ticking bomb. I double-checked every detail, the email distribution list, board members, shareholders, media, friends. The time trigger, 12:45 p.m., exactly as Graham would be sliding the ring on my finger. The attachments, photos, videos, financial records, and the voice memo that captured his confession in crystal-clear audio. Everything was in place. I pressed enter. The blast was now locked, automated, and irreversible. I closed the lid. Let the countdown begin. By 9 a.m., the bridal suite at Woodinville Vineyard buzzed like a wasp's nest, wrapped in white lace. Stylists moved around me, curling my hair, brushing glitter across my eyelids, pinning silk flowers into place. The smell of peonies and hairspray made the air thick. Caroline arrived wearing a tailored navy pantsuit and an expression that gave nothing away. She didn't ask me if I was okay. She asked, "Are you still sure?" I looked in the mirror. My reflection stared back. Eyes lined in gold, lips a soft mauve, skin radiant. But beneath it all, I saw her. The woman who had walked out of Graham's penthouse 2 nights ago. Ice in her veins, fire in her bones. "I'm not stopping," I said. Caroline exhaled, almost like she'd been holding her breath for days. "Then here." She handed me a second flash drive. "Manual override, in case the servers fail." I slipped it into the lining of my clutch. Our eyes met. "If this goes sideways," she said quietly, "you could blow up your own reputation too." I smiled gently. "Then let it burn." The sun was high by the time the car arrived. The vineyard looked like a dream, sweeping rows of grapevines, white orchids hanging in glass globes from the arbor, chairs lined in symmetry, guests dressed in cream and gray. A small string quartet played Vivaldi in the background. I stepped out of the car, veil draped over my arm, heels sharp against the stone path. Guests turned, murmuring admiration. Phones tilted, smiles bloomed. Every step I took was deliberate, graceful, controlled. Let them see what they want to see. A woman in love, a day of joy, a future secured. I passed Mia in the front row, dressed in pale rose, smiling with just enough restraint to seem professional. Her eyes flicked toward Graham, then to me. If she felt nervous, she didn't show it. Good, let her feel invincible. The music shifted, the signal. I was led to the bridal suite behind the vineyard. A final mirror check. My mother adjusted my veil, kissed my cheek. Her hands trembled with emotion. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" I nodded. "More than ever." She didn't catch the edge in my voice. At 12:43 p.m., I stood behind the double doors of the main hall, heart steady. Graham waited at the altar, smiling like a man who believed in the future he was selling. The guests rose. The music soared. My father offered me his arm. I took it. Not because I needed support, because I needed witnesses. We walked down the aisle. Every face turned. Every phone lifted. Every smile oblivious. When I reached Graham, he reached for my hands. They were warm, dry, steady, just like mine. The officiant welcomed the guests, spoke about love and loyalty, about new chapters and forever. I barely heard it. My eyes stayed on Graham's. He had no idea. He said his vows like a man reciting lines he'd practiced in the mirror. "I promise to cherish you, to protect you, to build a future with you, brick by brick, brick by brick, like a man laying a trap." Then came the final line, "I do." The crowd sighed, then turned to me, my cue, my line, my moment. I smiled softly, just enough to warm the room. Then I looked at my clutch. 12:44 p.m. I took a breath. 12:45. Every phone in the room buzzed at once. A ripple, a murmur, a rising wave of confusion. Guests pulled out phones, flashes of screens lighting up. Notifications, subject line. "Before I say I do." The officiant stumbled. Graham frowned. Mia's smile froze, and I stepped forward. "I'm sorry," I said, turning to the guests. "There won't be a wedding today." Gasps. Audible confusion. The quartet stopped playing. I turned to face Graham. "I want to thank you," I said into the microphone, "for teaching me what it means to love myself more than the illusion of safety, for showing me what manipulation looks like in a tuxedo." The murmurs grew louder. Mia stood. Phones started recording. "And thank you, Mia," I added, meeting her eyes. "You taught me what betrayal sounds like when it laughs in the dark." A reporter in the third row already had her phone raised, recording everything. I lifted my hand and removed the ring slowly, deliberately. "This is no longer a wedding," I said, placing the ring in Graham's palm. "It's a reckoning." Then I turned, walked off the altar. The train of my gown swept behind me like a curtain falling. The audience erupted, phones flashing, voices rising, chaos blooming like wildfire. Behind me, I heard Graham call my name, but I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. The truth had just detonated, and I was already walking out of the ashes, There's a silence that doesn't feel sacred, only sharp, the kind that slices through a room just before the gasping begins. 12:45 p.m. That was the moment everything shifted. That was when the dream died, and the reckoning began. I stood at the altar, veil trailing behind me like smoke, bouquet clutched in my hands like a final illusion. The vineyard was drenched in sunlight. The arbor above us was strung with white roses and silk. The guests, friends, family, investors, strangers in tailored suits, smiled with the warm expectancy of those about to witness love. Graham was beaming. His fingers rested lightly on mine, a perfect picture of devotion. His tux was immaculate, his cufflinks gleaming. He looked like every inch the man the world thought he was. Charming, ambitious, in love. But I knew better. He had just said, "I do." The officiant turned to me, every eye locked on my face. I smiled softly, the picture of bridal serenity, and then the buzzing began. First, a single vibration from someone's purse, then 2, then 5, then dozens, like a rising chorus of alerts and alarms. It swept through the guests in a wave. One by one, heads lowered. Phones were checked, eyes widened, screens lit with the same subject line. Before I say, "I do." Confusion rippled down the rows like wind through wheat. I looked at the officiant. "I'm sorry," I said clearly, my voice slicing through the murmurs. "There won't be a wedding today." A stunned silence fell over the vineyard, then whispers. My father stood halfway from his chair. My mother's mouth parted in horror. A few guests laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke. Graham's brows furrowed. "Elena," he said, low and cautious. "What are you doing?" I stepped forward. My heels clicked against the wooden platform like the first beats of a funeral march. "I want to thank you all for coming," I said into the microphone, now projecting over the growing unease. "And I especially want to thank Graham Walker, my almost husband, and Mia Halston, my assistant, for teaching me the cost of trust." The gasp that followed wasn't polite. It was primal. Across the crowd, phones glowed with opened emails, attached videos, audio files, a flood of digital truth washing over a wedding meant to celebrate a lie. Mia froze in her seat, staring at her screen, lips moving silently. The blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Graham turned toward me, his smile faltering. "What is this?" he demanded. "Evidence," I said calmly. "Of your betrayal, of your theft, of your plan." Gasps. Hands covered mouths. Whispers surged to murmurs. Guests stared between us as though waiting for someone to yell cut, as if this were some elaborate scene. I turned slightly, scanning the crowd. "Mia," I said, "has been sleeping with Graham for over 3 months. But that's the part I might have forgiven. The deeper crime, I let the pause linger. She used her access to my company's internal documents to send confidential strategy decks to Studio Parnell, the same firm Graham quietly partnered with after his so-called resignation. Journalists, real and amateur alike, had already begun recording. Fingers flew over screens. I spotted at least one microphone, pulled discreetly from a bag. The air was thick with disbelief. I turned back to Graham. The plan, I said, was simple. Marry me, leverage my company's assets, funnel proprietary data to your hidden partners, then walk away with millions. He shook his head. "You're insane." "Am I?" I tilted mine. "Or did I just beat you to the finish line?" He stepped forward, voice lower. "We can talk about this privately." "No," I said, louder. "We can't. Because you made it public the moment you made me your mark, the moment you weaponized my trust." The wind tugged gently at my veil. The string quartet had stopped playing. Mia stood now, visibly trembling. Her voice cracked. "This isn't true. She's making this up." "Then I guess we should all ignore the emails," I replied, meeting her eyes. "The video footage, the recorded calls, the financial trail that leads directly from your inbox to theirs." People were standing now. Guests turned their phones to one another. Murmurs had become declarations. "Oh my God! That's her voice! She recorded everything. He's finished. She's a damn genius." I removed my engagement ring, slowly, deliberately. It sparkled in the sunlight. I won't wear a symbol of manipulation. I held it out to Graham. He didn't take it, so I dropped it into his breast pocket. Let it sit there like a bullet he'd forgotten to dodge. I hope it burns, I whispered. Then I turned to the crowd. To anyone here who still believes in love, I do too, I said, voice steady. But I've learned that love without truth is just theater. And I'm done performing. The crowd was dead silent now. My mother stood, tears streaming down her cheeks, not from shame, from something else, something like pride. Carolyn, in the back, nodded once, and I smiled. I won't be your bride today, I said, stepping down from the altar, but I will be the woman who walked away, on her own terms. And I'll wear that title proudly. As I walked the aisle in reverse, guests parted for me, phones flashed, voices rose. Mia sank back into her chair. Graham just stood there, hands at his sides, watching everything crumble. He never said another word. He didn't have to. The whole world had already heard the truth. And I walked out of that wedding with no husband, no cake, no kiss, but with something far better. Myself. They say everything slows down when your life falls apart, but that's not true. Sometimes it speeds up. Sometimes it hits you like a freight train at full velocity. Phone calls, headlines, legal filings, broken silences, burned bridges. Sometimes the fallout is louder than the betrayal itself. It began minutes after I stepped off the altar. The emails detonated like synchronized grenades. The documents, the recordings, the timeline. All of it opened, read, forwarded, and posted. By the time I reached the vineyard's gravel driveway, the first news alert had hit my phone. Breaking: Seattle Tech CFO exposes fiancé's espionage in viral wedding day reveal. I didn't click the link. I didn't need to. Caroline met me by the getaway car, already on the phone with a legal team. She won't survive this, she said, eyes scanning through her tablet. She used a company-issued device for the data theft. Your company's board will sue. Her career's over. And Graham? Caroline exhaled. That depends on how fast he runs. But he'll be disbarred from any board for the next 10 years, maybe more. I sat in the passenger seat and leaned back against the headrest. The adrenaline hadn't fully worn off yet. I could still feel my heartbeat pounding in my wrists. I don't feel victorious, I murmured. You're not supposed to, she replied. You feel clean. Back at my house, the flowers from the wedding were still waiting, hundreds of them. Ivory orchids, baby's breath, white roses. I stood in the entryway, staring at them, my heels still on, my gown still trailing behind me like smoke. Then wordlessly, I started to take them down. One by one, I plucked the petals, stripped the ribbons, filled trash bags with the symbols of a day that never was. There was no ceremony, no cake, just closure. I changed into jeans and a sweater, pulled my hair into a bun, washed off the makeup. The woman who had walked out of that vineyard didn't need lashes or lipstick. She needed quiet. And a beginning. I didn't go back to my apartment. Instead, I drove across the bridge to Kirkland, to the house I grew up in. When my father opened the door, he didn't say a word. He just looked at me for a second, long enough for me to see it, the grief, the rage, the love. Then he stepped aside. And I stepped in. My mother was in the kitchen, clutching her phone. When she saw me, she started to cry. Not out of disappointment, not out of confusion. Out of something deeper, something like relief. I didn't expect what happened next. She crossed the room, wrapped her arms around me, and held me like I was still a child. Like all the years I'd spent building a fortress of independence had just dissolved. You were brave, she whispered, her hand on the back of my head. So brave. My father joined her. His hand rested gently on my back. No lectures, no questions, no blame, just warmth. For the first time in weeks, no, months, I let myself cry. Not because I was broken, but because I wasn't. Because even after everything, I had people who still saw me, still chose me. Not for what I could do, not for the mask I wore, but for being theirs. We sat on the kitchen floor, just the three of us, in a house that still smelled like roasted garlic and old love. I don't want to talk about him, I said finally. You don't have to, my dad replied. Or her. You don't have to, my mom echoed. I leaned my head back against the cabinet and closed my eyes. All the noise outside, news coverage, gossip, corporate tremors, it could wait. In here, I was just Elena, daughter, survivor. By nightfall, the world had erupted. Graham's architecture firm released a statement claiming shock and disappointment. Investors pulled out of deals. Mia's LinkedIn profile disappeared. One of the board members from my company issued a public apology, admitting he had sidelined my instincts in the past. It was vindication, yes, but also something deeper. For years, I had carried the weight of being the woman who never cracked, who never faltered, who had to work twice as hard and smile while doing it. And then I had shattered that image, on my own terms, not to be cruel, but to be real. Caroline texted me around midnight. Caroline, you just broke the internet. Me. I didn't want to be famous, Caroline. Too late. Then she added, Caroline, you were magnificent. I stared at that last word for a long time. Not perfect, not powerful, magnificent. Maybe that's what healing begins with. Not forgiveness, not peace, not even justice, but being seen for who you truly are when the lies fall away. Later that night, I stood in the backyard alone. The stars were out, the air was crisp, and the silence felt sacred again, not sharp, sacred. I didn't know what tomorrow held. I didn't know what headlines would say, but I knew this much. Graham and Mia were behind me now, not because I buried them, but because I buried the version of myself that needed their validation. And what remained was someone unshakable, someone whose heart had broken, but not bled out, someone who had learned that truth, when wielded with precision, didn't just destroy. It liberated. 1 year after the wedding that never happened, I was promoted to Chief Operating Officer. It wasn't a celebration, it was a shift. Quiet, steady, earned. The same board that once questioned my instincts now sought them out like compass points. My signature on a strategy memo carried more weight than entire departments. I walked into meetings without armor, but with something sharper. Clarity. The headlines had faded by then. The viral videos stopped circulating. The gossip lost its shine. People no longer whispered in elevators. But something fundamental had shifted. Not in the world, in me. I no longer played small to make others comfortable. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I no longer clung to the stories others wrote about me, good or bad. And I no longer confused proximity for partnership, or flattery for character. 6 months later, I left the company. Not out of anger, not to make a point. I simply realized I had outgrown the walls. I wanted something of my own. Something built with truth stitched into its DNA. So I built Northlight Consulting, a leadership and resilience advisory firm born out of scar tissue and vision. We focused on ethical growth, emotional intelligence, and teaching leaders how to navigate storms instead of pretending they didn't exist. Within 3 months, we had Fortune 500 clients. By month 6, I was flying to Switzerland to deliver a keynote titled, What They Don't Teach You About Surviving Power. I didn't just rebuild, I redefined. Graham and Mia disappeared from headlines like smoke after a fire. He was removed from 2 boards. His architectural license was placed under investigation. He'd later try to rebrand himself as a consultant for real estate startups. No one bit. Mia took a plea deal. She avoided jail, but forfeited all financial gain. She issued a formal apology that read like it had been spat out of a crisis PR agency. I never responded. When asked in interviews if I had forgiven them, I said, I don't carry that weight anymore. That's theirs to bear. Some people asked why I never sued. The truth was simple. I had already won. They tried to break my foundation. I built a kingdom on the rubble. The first time I met Daniel Carter, I didn't realize how much I needed him. It was at a leadership symposium in Vancouver. I was speaking on adaptive strategy in high volatility sectors. He sat in the second row, navy sweater, calm eyes, a yellow notepad already half filled before I'd even finished my intro slide. He didn't approach me after. He didn't hover, didn't pitch, didn't flatter. He simply nodded once as we passed in the hallway and said, Sharp talk. That was it. That restraint intrigued me more than any rehearsed compliment ever could. We crossed paths again 2 weeks later, this time at a round table on ethical tech leadership in San Francisco. He was one of the facilitators. He opened the session with a simple question. What do you wish someone had said to you the day everything fell apart? Silence. Then a woman in her 40s answered, You're still you. Daniel nodded. Exactly. That night at a group dinner, we found ourselves seated side by side. We talked quietly as the table buzzed around us, about books, about silence, about the weight of being trusted. He didn't ask about Graham. Instead, he asked, "What makes you feel safe now?" I remember blinking. No one had ever asked me that before. "I'm still figuring that out," I said honestly. He smiled, like that answer was not only acceptable, but beautiful. We didn't fall in love quickly. We didn't fall at all. We chose, daily, carefully, consciously. We walked. We built. That was the difference. Daniel never tried to outshine me, never competed with me. He admired my ambition, but didn't try to absorb it. He listened without trying to fix. He noticed small things. When my shoulders tensed, when I reached for a coffee cup I wasn't going to drink. On our third date, I told him I didn't know how to trust easily anymore. He didn't flinch. He simply said, "Then I'll wait." And he did. We took time to learn each other's rhythms, to sit in the stillness most people rush to escape. There were no games, no ultimatums, just respect, patience, and a shared commitment to letting the past be a teacher, not a jailer. One Sunday morning, over coffee and a playlist of Miles Davis, he looked up and said, "You know you're not hard to love, right?" I looked at him over the rim of my mug. He wasn't performing. He meant it the way people mean sky, the way oceans mean tide. And something in me softened. A string pulled taut for years finally let go. I didn't say thank you. I leaned across the table and kissed him. When I finally told him the full story, everything about Graham, about the vineyard, about the emails and the microphone and the ring, I braced for discomfort. He just nodded and said, "Thank you for surviving that." Not, "What a bastard." Not, "How could you not see it coming?" Just, "Thank you for surviving." It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to me. Northlight grew into more than a firm. It became a movement. I was invited to speak at panels titled "Women Who Reclaim the Narrative." I led retreats in Iceland, Tuscany, Kyoto, rooms full of leaders who no longer wanted to lead from fear. I created mental health playbooks for CEOs, equity frameworks for startups, executive circles built on trust, not dominance. The press stopped asking about the wedding. They started asking about the work. But I always carried the truth with me, quietly. That moment when everything fell apart wasn't the end. It was the door. And I had walked through it barefoot, alone, scorched, and still, somehow, whole. 10 years later, I barely remembered the date. It came and went like any other spring day. Sunlight soft against the windows, birdsong woven into the quiet. There was no bitterness in my chest, no tightness in my throat, only peace, and a quiet reverence for the path that had carried me here. Daniel and I had just celebrated our 7th wedding anniversary the week before. Not with champagne and formal dinners, but with a slow morning. Pancakes shaped like stars, made by our son with far too much flour. Jazz in the background, a dog asleep at our feet. We stayed in pajamas until noon, laughing about nothing, holding hands like teenagers in love. There was no armor between us, no performance, just breath, warmth, safety. I had built this life, not as a rebuttal to betrayal, but as a declaration. A quiet, powerful declaration that I would no longer live in survival mode, that I would create joy, not borrow it, that I would belong in my own story. Northlight Consulting had grown far beyond anything I imagined. We had offices in 4 cities. My TED Talk on ethical leadership had surpassed 1 million views. My 3rd book, The Currency of Trust, had become required reading at 3 universities. But my favorite role was not author or speaker or CEO. It was mom. Caleb was 4, wild and bright and impossibly tender. He asked questions that made me think for hours. He once told me the moon looked like it was listening. And I haven't seen it the same since. Some nights, I watched him sleep with his head tucked against my ribs and whispered thank you to the woman I used to be, for not letting bitterness take root. That evening, Daniel and I had dinner on the rooftop of our favorite restaurant in downtown Seattle, the place where he first said, "I love you." The place where I once told him about the vineyard, the ring, and the silence after. It had become our sacred place. The view of the Sound stretched before us, gold and blue in the sunset. Glass lanterns flickered along the railings, casting shadows over linen napkins and wine glasses. The air smelled of sea salt and early jasmine. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, their melody threading through the warm spring air. We were in the middle of a conversation about planting fig trees when I saw him. Graham. He was stepping out of the shadows at street level, wearing a valet uniform, creased black slacks, a navy windbreaker, earpiece coiled at his collar. He held out keys for an older couple, opened the passenger door, and nodded without being thanked. And behind him, Mia. Her hair was pulled back tightly, face paler than I remembered. She wore an apron with a faded logo, carrying 2 paper bags. She handed them off to a waiting delivery driver with robotic precision, never looking up. At first, I wasn't sure it was them, but then Graham turned, adjusting his collar, and for a second, his eyes met mine. Daniel noticed my shift before I said a word. "Is that him?" I nodded. He didn't say more, just gently covered my hand with his, grounding me with his presence. I sat there, still, not frozen in fear or anger, just still. It was like watching a photo you'd once cried over slowly fade into sepia, then dust. Graham held my gaze, and I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I felt nothing. Not hate, not sorrow, not even triumph. Just space. A vast still space between the woman I was and the woman I had become. He blinked, stunned. I smiled. Not with vengeance, not with victory, with peace. A quiet, wordless peace that said, "You no longer live here." Then he looked away. Mia never saw me. Or maybe she did, and chose not to. It didn't matter. They melted into the motion of the city. Ordinary, unnoticed, no longer part of my story. Daniel leaned closer, his voice gentle. "Still okay?" I turned to him, took in his face, the face of the man who saw every scar, and called me strong, not broken. I squeezed his hand. "I'm more than okay. I'm free." Later that night, on the drive home, the city blurred past us. Light, quiet, rhythm. I leaned against the window, watching the street lamps flicker over our windshield. "Do you ever think," I said, "that some people come into our lives just to destroy the illusion that we were ever invincible?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Maybe, or maybe they just expose what was already cracking." I smiled. That was him. Always slicing truth into softness, always listening between the words. When we got home, the house was asleep. I slipped into Caleb's room. He was curled on his side, one sock off, stuffed dinosaur in a headlock, blanket kicked to the floor. I adjusted it gently, kissed the soft skin of his temple, and lingered. "I chose this," I whispered. "And I'd choose it again. Every version of me would choose this. Because the truth was, my life didn't become beautiful because it was perfect. It became beautiful because I made it sacred after it broke. Because I filled it with people who loved the real, imperfect, ferocious me. Because I let myself feel again, risk again, trust again." That night, I crawled into bed beside Daniel and pulled the blanket to my chin. The moon spilled silver across our floor, and I let myself remember it all. The vineyard, the vows that were never said, the silence I once drowned in. But I didn't ache, I didn't long, I simply breathed. Forgiveness, I had learned, isn't a performance. It's not a press release. It's not a scene. It's what happens in quiet moments when you don't feel like proving anything anymore. It's the unspoken letting go of what never deserved to stay. It's not forgetting the scar. It's no longer needing to press it. And in that soft letting go, in that final release of needing anything from them, I found the most unexpected gift. A life so beautiful, so achingly gentle, so loud in laughter and soft in truth, that I didn't even notice the moment I became whole. I just looked around and realized I already was. And then, after all the hurt, betrayal, and collapse, Elena did not take revenge with anger, but with rebirth. She did not destroy anyone. She simply refused to let herself be swallowed by their darkness. Instead, she chose to rebuild her life, brick by brick, with trust, kindness, and the courage to love one more time. It wasn't a glorious victory. It was the quiet act of walking away from the wound, carrying light with her. Silence is sometimes the loudest bell. And forgiveness, when no one asks for it, is a gift only the strongest can give. If you have ever been betrayed, if you have ever walked out of a room with a shattered heart and still chose to love life again, leave a comment. I have moved on. No need to tell everything, no need to prove anything. All you need to know is this: you are not alone, and your story can be just as beautiful as the way Elena rewrote her own.